We are federales, you know, the mountain police.
If you're the police, where are your badges?
Badges? We ain't got no badges. We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges.
In a recent case launched by a client of Thompson Kernaghan, the Ontario Court of Appeal maintained that the Investment Dealers Association does not owe a duty of care and is not accountable to individual investors. "13 provinces and territories have handed their enforcement duties to trade and lobby groups who represent the investment industry. People like the Investment Dealers Association, who've now changed their name to the Investment Regulatory Organization of Canada to try to change their image. The Mutual Fund Dealers Association, the Investment Funds Institute of Canada, the list of professional bodies claiming to protect us goes longer than I can describe. And the result is that no one in Canada is responsible. I learned of Nora Cosgrove and how she took the largest bank investment dealer to court for $10,000. Their defense to her was that they felt they did not owe her a fiduciary duty. I was shocked to hear this. Did this mean that every customer in Canada was in a buyer beware relationship unless they signed all power over to their broker? I met her daughter, a veritable force of nature because of how they treated her mother.
I was told, we are not going to investigate your mother's case. She's 90 years old. She could be dead within the year. You have to realize investigations are expensive and we have to get the best bang for our buck.
This is the kind of answer the public gets from industries who are allowed to police themselves.
My experience with the self-regulators was quite shocking. This is Canada, after all.
My brother came to me in 2004 after he found that his 90-year-old father-in-law had unknowingly signed over his condominium to his investment salesman, with no money changing hands, no appraisal, no interest. And when he went to the securities regulators, they would not even get involved.
They seemed to be, all they wanted to do was divest themselves of any responsibility or potential investigation that negatively reflected on their oversight, their industry, their agents, that kind of thing. They just either wanted to pretend that it hadn't happened or that it wasn't it wasn't a valid complaint, that it should go someplace else.
He had to conduct his own investigation, do his own research, and fight to get his father-in-law's property returned to him.
I solved my problem, but without their help, for sure.
The investment salesman who took the old man's property from him was fired, moved down 2 floors in the Kelowna office tower, and immediately went back to work in the same business. Let's meet the entire staff of the only investor protection agency in Canada.
People are being misled by the regulators.
His agency is the only one in the country that is not paid by the investment industry. Crown corporations, like your securities commissions, feel that they can delegate their duties down to private trade associations. They think they can trust the most clever, most cunning white-collar businessmen to police themselves on the honor system. We're finding out now that this does not work.
It's exactly like having a fox in charge of the hen houses.
These regulators will only do what they perceive to be a slam dunk. And the slam dunk is the person who has no power or money.
Imagine making a complaint about losing your life's work and being told by people who represent the industry that your complaint is not valid.
Very little attention to the level of prosecutions, and that's the basis upon which so few actually see the light of day. Only 1 in 25 complaints ever end up in an action.
What if only 1 in every 25 calls to 911 resulted in an action being taken?
Effort to conceal things more than an effort to constructively police the industry and or defend the consumer.
If you are an investor victim or an advocate making complaints, such criteria sheet is never publicly disclosed to you. There has been only one prosecution in 3 years, and the prosecution that they undertook, which was successful, was a junior employee working in a cage for the HSBC Bank.
So they got one guy handling stocks and bond certificates in a back office
of a bank
where the in 3 years
the victim was the bank.
U.S. tactics have helped federal prosecutors to rein in fraud by more than 1,000 companies since 2002. Companies like WorldCom and Adelphia Communications. The record of the Integrated Market Enforcement Team after 3 years and 57 million. Vancouver, they have laid 1 charge against 1 man. In Calgary, 0 charges laid. Montreal, 0. And Toronto, they've got 3 cases.
It appears from the outside as an effort to conceal things more than an effort to constructively police the industry and or defend the consumer.
These are SROs without enabling legislation.
SRO refers to self-regulatory agencies, people who police themselves on the honor system.
What the public doesn't understand is that the government has abdicated their responsibility to a body that cannot perform the duties that it's required to do. Thereby, you are unprotected.
More and more, the regulation and the standards and the documents and the paperwork are to look after the industry and the industry member.
It's a pretense that the industry is protected or the consumer is protected when in actual fact you are buyer beware.
They're investigating themselves. Yeah.
The IDA, in my view, from what I have experienced, is an embarrassment and a disgrace.
I tend to look at the Canadian financial services industry as probably about 20 years behind places like the UK.
No other country in the world does it this way, so it shouldn't be done because we look like the laughingstock of the world.
But we have the most profitable banks in the world. That should tell us something about how monopolized we are by those banks. They are the most powerful organizations in Canada, and they write their own rules. Some say they have a license to print money. It makes me wonder why good people do evil things to others. What could possibly get people to allow financial abuse to be used on fellow Canadians? To allow trusting, vulnerable, and often elderly people to be victimized by the financial industry? How could they look away and play see no evil?
Your retirement depends on keeping your mouth shut. What are you going to do?
We don't want a national regulator because we're getting paid good bucks to do absolutely nothing and pass the buck here as it is now.
The head of the Ontario Securities Commission makes approximately $600,000, and the head commissioner makes close to $500,000. A head of enforcement at the OSC makes around $150,000.
And paid by the investment industry. One has to wonder why.
If you receive a personal benefit by not executing the law, your duties to the public, then it's a breach of trust.
That's a criminal code violation.
Yes, that's in the federal criminal code.
It seems that self-interest and remaining a part of even a bad system is more attractive than being professional. In my province of Alberta, my own Securities Commission had so much unprofessional behavior to hide that they tried to fight having our own Auditor General do an audit of them.
Mr. Speaker, every day the efforts of the Alberta Securities Commission to prevent a proper investigation into its operation grow more desperate. We now have a situation in which the ASC is placing unacceptable conditions on a proposed systems audit by the Auditor General. It is making many people wonder what there is to hide there and is increasing the calls for a public inquiry.
Thank you, Dr. Taft, for being the first person of authority in Canada to have the courage to question such a well-entrenched system of corruption.
How many regulators can you think of in Canada? I can think of probably 13 to 20 some, and I've heard numbers higher when you look at ombudsmen and things. Is that fair?
13 securities regulators, because each of the 10 provinces and 3 territories has their own regulator.
Yeah.
And then we can do the same thing, 13 with the mutual funds. So that's, now we're at 26. And each province has their own set of rules and regs, and each of the silos of financial services has their own rules and regs. So not only do you have to have multiple rules depending on what your licensing is, but those rules will be different as you go from province to province. It's just nuts.
And here is how the Ontario Securities Commission stacks the system with hundreds of paid yes men, all of whom are on the securities police payroll.
There were 14 different committees who were providing advice to the Provincial Securities Commission.
14 committees with multiple people on each committee?
With at least 15 on each. The vast majority of these committees are comprised of investment bankers, not even the research side of the investment banking industry. Okay. They would comprise very heavy representation of securities lawyers, and to a limited extent you're going to see portfolio managers from the institutional money management community. Anybody knows who's ever worked on a committee that if you have 13 people sitting around a room trying to make a decision, the odds are very high it's going to go to the lowest common denominator.
Yesterday, under questioning, the Minister of Finance said, and I quote, "The Commission is confident that the workings of the Commission are in order." Well, what else are they going to say?
An OSC member sits on the IMET board. And
well, let's go there.
RCMP, Integrated Market Enforcement Team, crack shot detectives.
Oh, really?
Financial detectives.
Oh, really? The OSC have a member.
Yes.
On that.
On the IMET teams.
On the IMET teams, and they can only investigate what is brought
What's approved by that committee. So, and so is the IDA, the Investment Dealers Association, and each of the provincial securities commissions have representatives on the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The commissions will say they can't get the job done because they're not police. So they'll start to point the finger at, you know, the RCMP is really in this circle of possible enforcement bodies. So the commissions say, we'd love to do something, but we're not the police.
So if you have only 5 banks doing 90% of the business in Canada, and they have their own private rent-a-cops to police their behavior, do we really have the strongest banks in the world, or have we created a monopoly monster?
These guys are untouchable. This is the problem.
Yeah. Why aren't the banks touchable? Too powerful? Too strong? Too much legal might? What?
All of the above.
They report to no one, then they decide which rules are which and how to enforce them or whether to ignore them. And so they can interpret the decision as being not a decision if the decision makers decide.
And you don't get into a court unless you have a decision. So basically staff says we've not made any decisions. You go to the commission, they say, what are you doing here? There are no decisions. And so you need a commission decision to go to a court. So commission decisions are capable of being appealed if you get a decision.
Yes.
But in this area of enforcement, there are no decisions. The vast majority of the crimes are not subject to any decisions.
You've gone to the Ontario Securities Commission, which is a statutory body, which is an agency for the purposes of enforcing the Securities Act. However, if you go to their About the OSC website and go to the section that says Investors, they will direct you to go to the SROs, not to contact the OSC.
Self-regulators.
The SROs.
Which have no statutory authority.
Right.
And are defined by some as being the club. They're a lobby group in Ottawa, registered as a lobby group?
Yes, they are.
So you're sent to a lobby group like the Greater Toronto Area Automobile Dealers Association to resolve a complaint against an automobile dealer. How are you supposed to get resolution from that if you're...
I got the same question. Who are these SROs? Why are we dealing with them? Why has the government put this corporate entity between us and government? Are you protecting yourselves? They can't protect us. You could, but you refuse to.
The primary regulator of the securities industry, the Investment Dealers Association, broke into 2 different organizations, one to act as the SRO, the self-regulatory organization, and the other to act as a trade organization to promote the interest of the member firms. It's a question of trust including the perception of trust, and conflict, including the perception of conflict. And the IDA, when it decided to break in half, right up to the end, denied that there was ever any kind of a conflict in its role.
So how do they get away with it? How do they represent themselves as being operating with ethics and integrity when they're industry trade bodies?
How do you get away with it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
This book, The Lucifer Effect, does the best job I have seen to explain how large, intricate systems of behavior become corrupt. It is required reading, in my opinion, for anyone wanting to understand bad systems or to design better ones.
Well, there's two ways to protect the reputation of your industry, is to truly deal with your bad apples, which they do from time to time.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the investor victims who have lost their life savings have no restitution for their losses. The other way in which to protect your reputation is to have the public believe there is no crime.
The thing is, right now, the industry seems to have enough loopholes that it doesn't matter what the fact pattern of the case is.
Yes.
The firms and the SROs that represent them will always find some excuse, some way to rationalize why the claim being brought forward is, in their view, spurious, when in fact it might have a great deal of merit.
If you receive an investment loss as a Canadian,
yes,
that has been caused by malfeasance of your financial advisor. That's something that the Securities Commissions don't deal with at all.
My question to the government House Leader: how much longer will the government put up with this dysfunctional Securities Commission before some decisive action is taken? Mr. Speaker, this government has known for over a year about serious allegations of wrongdoing at the Alberta Securities Commission. In a January 9, 2004 letter, a former ASC enforcement director told the government what had long been suspected, namely that there is a two-tiered regulatory regime with one set of rules for normal Albertans and another set for insiders and the powerful. My question is to the Minister of Finance. Why has the government, for the past 15 months, been covering up serious allegations of wrongdoing at the Alberta Securities Commission?
I believe it is because the Alberta Securities Commission is a Crown corporation under our Finance Ministry, and our Finance Minister of the day is afraid to admit that she's responsible for such a failing organization. As an insider of such a bad system, she feels that defending her job is more important than doing her job.